Hello YouTube and welcome to winter on the Isle of Man. We've recently had a bit of a cold snap and I figured that's the perfect excuse and reason to go out and do a little video about the colder time of the year on the island. But I'm gonna do that while sitting in my car because it's absolutely freezing up here. So here we are. Well, it really is cold out there. I'm up here on the mountain near the bungalow, just up the road. Because most snow that we do get here, we get up on the mountain. There's actually nothing in Douglas or in the lower areas at the moment. So, what is winter like on the Isle of Man? Well, if you are from a country that gets proper winters and, big snow and ice and minus 20, minus 30 degree chills, it's not like that. It's actually relatively mild. And most of the time, the temperatures won't fall below zero. When they do, maybe you get 0, maybe -5, -7, thereabouts. Anything colder than that is, I would say, relatively unusual. Also, we do get a bit of snow and ice, mostly in the higher up areas, as you've just seen there on the mountain road, which is where I'm driving now. But you don't get that much snow and ice up in the lower regions, or by the seasides, and in places like Douglas or Ramsey. It's not very common to get meters of snow like you may see when you're from Canada or south of Bavaria or something. So our winters generally are relatively mild. They do get windy and they do get wet. So, do get windproofs, waterproofs, even gloves, hat. You've seen I've swapped my famous red cap for a winter hat because it's just cold out here. And the one thing that you do get here is a considerable wind chill factor. The island is always windy. It's in the middle of the Irish Sea. Nothing really protects it from the wind, which is why I just escaped from outside and hopped back in the car, because the wind chill, even though at the moment I think we're still in the plus, the wind chill makes it feel a lot colder than it actually is. So if I stood out there for too long, I would just get chilled to the bones, which is why I escaped back into my car and I'm talking to you from here while taking a nice leisurely drive on a Saturday morning over the mountain. So winter's generally quite mild, quite not so cold. We do get the odd winter freak sort of snowfall. I think the last time was over a decade ago. I'll dig out some pictures of police cars getting lost in snowstorms and that kind of thing. But it's very, very rare. Most winters here are very mild and it's just windy and rainy and a bit grayer than before. Of course, the days are also a lot shorter. If you are from areas in the world where that's not really a factor, like if you're from Philippines or somewhere, the days here do get very, very short. The sunset at the moment, it's December now, December 2022. Sunset right now, I think is 3:50 p.m. or something. So, that's it. Daylight's gone. Doesn't really get bright until 8 or 9 in the morning. So your days are short. They're colder, they're windy, they're grey, and they're a bit wet. But generally, it's relatively mild compared to other places. Having said that, there's a few things you may want to keep in mind when it comes to winter over here, and especially when you are planning to move over here. One of them is, well, there's two things I think you should keep in mind. Number one is have a look at the location of any property you're looking to buy or rent and how much sunlight it gets, because that can very drastically influence your utility bills. And I'm speaking from personal experience here. If your house, or it primarily affects really houses and semi-detached houses, if that is in an area that doesn't get very much sunlight, there are loads of them in estates, at the bottom of hills, that kind of thing, then you will find that you're going to have to use your heating an awful lot more than if your house does get a lot of sun. And I am speaking from personal experience. The place where I lived previously was on Lee Terrace in Douglas, which is just by Douglas Head at the bottom. And at the bottom of that hill, it never really got any sun in the winter. It's just one of those blind spots. And as a result, I had to have the heating on all the time, and the heating bills were absolutely killing me. But the place where I live now, on Summerhill in Douglas, is exposed to the sun all day. It's a detached little bungalow. It is, baked by the sun all day, which means even in winter now, during the day, I never really need the heating. And that saves you an awful lot of money. So tip number one, keep an eye on where your property is, and also check, of course, that it's well insulated, that it has double glazing, that the double glazing isn't blown, and that it's not too expensive to heat. But number two, do look at what kind of heating system it uses, because utilities, like everywhere else in the world, are very expensive here. There's three primary ones. There's gas, oil, and electric. Electric is kind of sort of just up and coming, you know, heat pumps, that kind of thing. It's growing over here, but I don't think very many houses have heat pumps yet. Oil, a lot of people switched to in recent years because it just was cheaper than gas. I don't know that much about it, but it's probably, you know, still cost efficient at the moment. Just make sure the system that you have is well maintained. But when it comes to gas, most places where I lived have gas boilers. Make sure that the boiler is well maintained, and make sure that it is a newer type condenser boiler. So that's way more efficient than any of the old types, because that will make a massive difference to your heating bill, trust me. So make sure that, you know, when you look at properties, make sure it's not like a 20-year-old crappy boiler that will eat the hair of your head in terms of how much gas it uses. It makes a big difference. Make sure there's a thermostat in the house that's well insulated, and, you know, that will help you a lot. So that's the two things I would look at if I moved here just for winter. But generally winters are relatively mild, they're windy, they may be a bit wet, maybe a bit grey, but they can be also absolutely magical. Some of the winter light is so beautiful. And it's really a really nice time to, you know, go out and about and enjoy sort of the absolute magical nature that you get here. It's really beautiful. Just, you know, remember to bring your windbreaker and your thermal underwear and a hat. When it comes to driving and generally getting around the Isle of Man during winter, again, if you are from a country that does have proper winter and snowfall and ice and very cold temperatures, then you're going to get a little bit surprised by the way things are done here. Because we don't get very many cold and winter and snow days, the resources that we have to cope with it are limited. And that means we do have gritter trucks and snowplows, but we don't have very many of them, because there simply is no point buying a fleet of 12 or 24 gritter trucks. They're very expensive machines for, you know, the 2-3 days or maybe a couple of weeks that we actually really need them. So the Department of Infrastructure does have gritter trucks, and they do go out and clear the roads in the morning when it's icy and cold, as they have done last week when we had this big cold spell that came now. But there are very few of them, and they focus on the primary routes. So they are using them very strategically, which means they will first of all clear the main roads from, say, Douglas to Ramsey and around the Isle of Man. So they will clear the TT course, they will clear the coast road, they will clear the main arterial roads through the main towns and through Douglas. But they may not clear your neighborhood in the way that you might be used to if you're from a country that has proper strong winters. So keep that in mind, that you might be coming out of your door in the morning and you're going to find your pavement and the roads in your neighborhood still iced over, and there's not going to be a gritter truck coming. What you can do in those cases is you look for a yellow grit box at the side of the road. There's thousands of them. There's some in every neighborhood. And you get a bucket and a shovel, and you get a bit of grit, which is your rock salt or molasses, and you just grit the area where you live yourself. Again, the island has a great community spirit, and a lot of people do that. They grit the sidewalks, the pavements, we're in Britain, and they grit, you know, the roads and their driveways and the areas where they live themselves, because there just isn't enough government resource to do it for them. If you find that the box where you live is empty, then there's a 3-digit number on top of the box, and there's a phone number next to it. Phone that number, and a big yellow truck will turn up and refill it for you. And that works really well. So it's sort of a, you know, joint effort between the government clearing the main routes and people just looking after themselves and each other and clearing the areas where they live. And that works pretty well. What does get affected a lot in the winter when there are cold spells is public transport, mainly because not all the side roads and estates can be cleared in time for the morning buses, for example, to go. So what you should do in the winter, when winter comes or you see there's a cold spell announced, do check the government Facebook pages primarily. So Isle of Man Constabulary, they have a good page. Department of Infrastructure, Isle of Man Transport, and check for updates there to see if your particular bus in that area, for example, will run in the morning, or if it may be disrupted due to simply icy conditions and it being too dangerous to drive. And then you can adjust accordingly. We do get quite a bit of snow and ice. Well, not a lot of snow, but we do get icy conditions on the road. And even last week it was getting quite icy down in Douglas where I live. So do expect winter commute to take a little longer because people drive slower. Also, generally people here don't really use winter tires very much. It's not like in Germany or other countries where it's the law that you have to have winter tires from a certain date. I think in Germany it's now the law that from October till April or something you have to have winter tires. That's not the rule here, so people mostly just use whatever tires they have. A few people might, stick on all year or winter tires, but I would say it's the minority. Most people just stick any tires on their car and go. So you do get, slower commutes and maybe some accidents and incidents and delays that come with that in the winter, so do expect that. Also, people generally are not really used to driving in the winter here in icy conditions. It just doesn't happen very often. Where I grew up in Bavaria, I literally passed my driving license, my exam, in a snowstorm, which was great because you couldn't see the road markings and you couldn't prove that I went over some lines. But anyway, don't really get that here. So, if you're from a country that gets a lot of snow and you're used to snow driving, just be a bit patient and understanding that it doesn't happen here very often. And, you will find a greater degree of disruption when there is a proper snowfall and ice than you may find wherever you grew up or from. But generally, winter isn't that bad. And what we do get primarily on the roads really is ice. And that's because when it rains and then it gets cold overnight, we do get black ice, which is very dangerous. So even you can't see it. It's the road looks clear and dry, but it isn't. It's actually full of ice. So just expect a bit of black ice and drive to the conditions, as they would say. What you will also find is that the mountain road, which is the lovely road I just drove on, gets closed quite a lot during winter, and even gets closed when it doesn't seem necessary at first glance. It's a bit like now. There's no snow down here in Douglas. Most of the hills up the road there look green and wonderful. But the mountain road was actually closed for the last week, pretty much. And the reason for that is that this is the area where it does get the coldest and there's most wind and most snow and ice will occur. And while they could probably keep it open if they were, to grit it all the time and just drive back and forth all the time, I think police and government or Department of Infrastructure made a strategic decision to limit the amount of driving taking place up there in these conditions, purely because most people do not have winter tires and aren't used to the conditions. And the risk of incidents and accidents is simply quite high, and there's no real need to have that road open if you can use the coast road or the TT course. So it's I think it's more of a strategic decision rather than the conditions really being so bad that you couldn't drive there. And I understand that. The hospital here, for example, A&E, is already under a lot of stress at the moment. Winter puts additional stress on it, not just from respiratory illnesses and general demand, but of course, people fall over on ice, break bones, that kind of thing. And I understand that the police may want to, prevent even more people from ending up in A&E, or ER as you call it in America, because they stack their car up on the mountain. And the mountain road, of course, is a dangerous road, and in the winter even more so. So do expect, the road to be closed, even if it doesn't feel necessary at first glance. And just be a bit understanding about that. But generally, winters here are mild. So we had a cold snap last week. It's now nice and sunny again. It's always windy, keep that in mind, but it does get sunny for a few hours a day, not very long in winter, and it's not too bad.